nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they use data to solve the world's problems, to highlight all of the really cool data jobs that are available out there that you might not know are data related. And we always include some fun bits because we're all nerds here and we love to have fun. So today with us, we have Matt Blasa. How are you, Matt?
Good. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. We usually start off the show by understanding people's origin stories because we're all nerds. We love origin stories and comic books, right? So if you could please let us know a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today in your career.
So, after I did my time in the military, I spent like 2 years wandering around East Asia. I did I took basically a career break and did bartending. So that was one thing I did for a while. Um,
Fun.
yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, you learn how to make. I like B-52s, lighting stuff on fire, but
Okay.
mixing drinks. But there's a lot of technical aspect on that. After I did that, I got into a role with Drake University doing a little bit of international analytics, and then after that, I ended up back in Asia for a French department store, Carrefour, doing a lot of their sales and marketing analytics, which actually started me out on the data path. So it always started out with the questions like why is this? So I first started out like, why is my data like this way? What is the reasons? Then it became, okay, I need to analyze it. So I became a data analyst. Like, okay, I like analyzing this. How can I do this better? And then, oh, I need to predict this. So I joined a startup and ended up being data scientist. Before the title existed, we were data analyst statistics or something crazy like that. But we were
Oh.
doing modeling. So we started out with that, and then from there it just started evolving. So I'm like, okay, I have these models, I'm trying to understand it. What do I need to do? So ended up doing governance, and then, okay, we're doing governance, how do we deploy the models? So my whole path right now has been literally chasing curiosity, and here I am now doing data strategy and AI strategy, which is, if you asked me 3 years ago what I'd be doing, I would say, what, are you serious? And it's been quite a ride. I've really enjoyed it so far.
That's awesome. Very much like my background as well, where you're just like trying new things because you're like, wait, what about this? What about this? And you just like try everything.
It's always experimenting. You got to reinvent yourself after 2 years. That's a thing for the audience, really.
I completely agree. There is something about the 2 year mark. I've heard this over and over by different speakers also. There's something about the 2 year mark that just hits the spot, and you're like, okay, let's try new things and move on.
Yeah, it's the most interesting thing because, like, I think it's like at that point you've gotten enough um, information to figure out what your next path is, or if you want to double down on what you're doing. And even
Hmm.
if you that 2 years you're saying, well, I want to stay a data scientist forever, you start specializing out because, like, I've seen it where the junior data scientist says, oh, I really love marketing mix model, and then they specialize down just onto that, and that's where they go. Or they say, well, I want to take a broader view, and they go, hey, I want to be a manager, or hey, I
Hmm.
want to do like deploy the models. So it's always evolving, and it's very, very interesting.
So, what is your title currently and your main roles and responsibilities?
So current title is data strategy at Aspire Analytics. My current role is multiple hats. So I'm doing anything from one day from account management and business development, which is working with my clients to actually understand what their needs are, to sometimes as far as, hey, okay, providing deployment support, like either coding, helping them like simplify their code, refactor it the right way, or even doing a little bit of ML ops engineer. So just working with them to structure their flows the right way so they can deploy effectively. So it can be a varied thing from one day to the next. I could just be advising, or I could just be building.
So, never a dull day in your world.
For a dull day.
That's the place to be, is when you're working on like different projects all the time and different clients all the time. Then it's like it's kind of the same as having a new job all the time, too.
Yeah, it really is. And even if you've seen it once, you're going and you see the same problem again, it always has a different angle depending on the industry or their requirements. So you got to
Yeah.
keep researching, keep learning, because it's always going to be like different angle of it.
Absolutely. Continuous learning is key in this field. Things are constantly changing. My next question for you is, how do you define data?
Well, defining data, I would say data is information. So it's a fluid definition. It depends entirely on who's trying, what kind of data they need. So what is good data for a data engineer is not good data for a data scientist, or is not good data for a stakeholder. It depends on the definition, and then how deep you want to go into that definition, and then lastly how you're going to use it. So it all depends. Data on itself is just raw information, and trying to understand it means trying to understand what you're going to use it for.
Speaking of what you're going to use it for, what are your favorite problems to solve using data?
I would say recommendation and recommendation
Mm-hmm.
and pricing. It's very interesting because you can really, with recommendation, it's never a dull day. It's never a dull day in recommend rec systems. There's still lots of stuff to learn, even for me, and I've been doing it for 2, 3 years now, and it's it's really trying to understand the customer psychology too. And then there's a lot of gray areas, and there's a lot of X factors. So you have to really go into it very deep. Other aspect is I really like about data is trying to think strategically about it. It's you hit a point in your career where you're like either okay, I'm a builder. This is what I'm going to do. I like building things. I'm going to stick to building. Or you go to a point where you're just like, okay, how does this fit in the larger picture? And trying to understand how that data fits in the larger picture, how it enables insights, and how it like makes business decisions, and seeing actual tangible results of your data. That's amazing.
That's the best.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
What area is your favorite to build recommender systems in?
I would say retail. It's pretty
Okay.
retail is pretty fun because like you never know what the customer wants and you
Mm-hmm.
never know how the level you're going to personalize it. So I mean, you can just do a categorical personalization like okay, they interact what's popular, like how what's popular. You can do semi-personalized, which is okay, we personalize it based on their interactions on this site, assuming they're the same customer. Sometimes you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then the holy grail, which is coming, is fully personalized. Like you can actually personalize it because you know that's them. And it's a balance because you're trying to balance data privacy, because if you collect too much data, that's
Mm-hmm.
a governance issue, and trying to balance, okay, how can I recommend them the best thing? And it's amazing to do that. It's a huge balance, and it never ends.
What is the, I guess, most interesting pairing or recommendation that you've seen when building these recommender systems, particularly either in retail or somewhere else?
Oh, when they fail, oh, those are funny. Like I've seen recommendation systems that were just like you bought it. Let's say you're a customer, you bought a hammer. I need a hammer for a project. I need to build a deck. And then the recommendation system, because you're not tuning the parameters enough, or you're not being specific, or the data's not clean enough, will say, you bought a hammer. Would you like another hammer? It'll recommend the
Yes.
same thing. Only because the hammer was classified and labeled as a different type than the hammer you bought. And the
Mm.
labeling matters. I would say I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what a label is, or classifying this. And it's multidimensional, which gets crazy after a while.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm just thinking, I didn't know that there was different types of hammers.
There are, yeah. Or or what people assume is a hammer. I've seen that one too. I've seen it
Oh.
where, yeah, I've seen it where someone's done a labeling system and it classified they because labeling, as we all know, is just very, very time intensive and even
Hmm.
manual. So they used a program to clean it up, and then it labeled as it wanted. And we found out, oh, well, there was an extra parameter there that it labeled it a different way. So a lot of this can come down to labeling, or what's perceived as a category. And it'll differ from industry, from one company to the next. Like one company will think one label is useful, and then another will think it's
Mm.
useful. It's this, or they'll come up with a different one. So you're never running out of things to do.
That's true. So you basically, when you work for different clients and you're thinking that you're building the same recommender system because they're in the retail industry, you basically have to start from ground zero because
Yep.
people don't label or interpret things in the same manner.
Exactly. And you have to bring all the subject matter experts into the room, and not just the subject matter experts, but also the engineers, because some people might have the right categories, but then you have to ask, how long will it cost to like label all these categories, and how much data
Mm.
do we need to, and how's that data being processed in? So that can get very complicated really quick. Sometimes you need to use a heuristic instead of just saying, well, we got to define it. So
Yeah. So what are the different techniques that you've used when labeling data?
I mean, there's multiple ones here. I've gone from, basic like hand labeling, get the interns to label everything, QA the labeling. That's one.
Mhm.
That's one. I mean, there's third-party tools that you can label the data, and it depends on what we're labeling. If it's just categories and you're just only doing it one-dimensionally, just saying, okay, it's based off that, that's not too bad. Or
Yeah.
label the simpler method I've just seen is someone just using a SQL case statement just to label all the data based off certain factors,
Okay.
which on its own can be a hit and miss depending on how many conditions you're putting in. More conditions, the more
Yeah.
complicated and the more cascading a failure can be. So it's a lot of process orientation when you're doing this.
Yeah. And then how many
Yeah.
features you have in your data to identify the products that you have.
Correct. Then
Oh,
dimensionality. You can get into a dimensionality issue and have like 6 dimensionality on it, and it will literally break the recommender if you're not careful. Or even how people define things. Like, for example, we're both wearing glasses, right?
mhm.
Someone who's like a general like retailer whose main focus isn't glasses will just say category glasses. But when you go to another person, they'll label that differently completely.
By brand or by shape or weight or the
So like
material.
brand is an obvious one, yeah. Obviously,
Yeah.
materials, colors are also an obvious one. But then you get
Mhm.
into subjective ones. Subjective ones are just like, okay, is this a luxury brand or a
Uh,
premium brand or a what's it
mhm.
called, a discount brand? And that can get really tricky really quick, especially if the classifications are different in different systems, which
Yeah.
is more common than people think.
When I think about recommender systems, the first thing that comes into my mind is always Netflix,
Hmm.
right? And so this makes me want to head on over to our fun bits. Is that all right with
Yeah,
you? All
that's great. Let's
right.
do it.
So, what I mean by recommender systems with Netflix is that if you have a Netflix, I think almost everybody does, is that they recommend different movies or shows that you might also be interested in. And I know that, Matt, you are a movie buff. You like to watch movies. And so I wanted to ask you and pick your brain about what movies would you recommend or are your favorite strategic movies, right? That make you more strategic or a stronger data professional?
I would say Inception. That's an odd one that I'm going to say. Yeah, Inception. Because it emphasizes like that everything is kind of relative depending on what the person's doing, and it's
Mm,
also very relative depending on the environment you're in. So it's like data is very relative. Like clean data for one company or even one department inside the same company can be totally different in the others. And the first thing you need to do is are you being incepted in here, or are you being like inside another inception inside an inception? Because that can happen with data, because one person larger can define the data a certain way, and then the person who's underneath them can define that a different way, and that can lead to data quality issues or even odd models, because the definition was different, the higher definition was different, which affected everything else beneath it.
I need to watch that movie again.
Shutter Island's also a good one.
Oh, that one's really good too.
Uh-huh.
So I was thinking a lot of people talk about Moneyball, especially in the data science community,
I
as being
haven't seen that one.
movies. You know what? I don't think I've technically seen all of it either. I've just seen a lot of the memes and the general, understanding of the strategic, applying the math and the statistics in order to create the best team. But one that I thought of when I was putting together thoughts and questions for today was Squid Game.
Yeah.
So I remember I was watching Squid Game and I was very involved in like, no, you should do it this way, you should do it that way. I was very strategic in the way that everyone was playing the games.
Yeah, but it goes back down to like what I was going to say about strategy. Actually, with strategy, people think strategy is a list. So you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that order. But what happens if 3 fails, or what if you have an option to jump to 6?
Yeah.
That's what the best thing for strategy, and I found out, is to be able to. It's like you have to position. It's being able to position on multiple areas and then develop that position over time, so that you have multiple areas to address. So if one, it's like product. It's one thing I learned from product management. You have to develop different like ideas of what the product looks like, so that if one idea doesn't pan out, you can switch to another. And when you switch to another, it doesn't slow down your operations pace, like your development pace. And it also doesn't slow down your product, because one thing I keep running into every time with machine learning models or any data product is we will often, and I've done it, where you'll develop one, you'll say, okay, we need to use neural network for this model, when the real question should have been, should we use a neural net? What other options can we do in case our data fail, our model building fails for some reason? So the idea is create multiple products for strategy, so that multiple avenues, so that not only you can keep the development going, but if something fails, you can use it. Or here's another angle: you get your data product, it works, but you have 2 more options to deliver more value in the future. You've basically created 3 models that you can use for something else. So it's 3 positions you can run from if you need it. The lessons learned don't go away simply because you failed at the model. Sometimes it teaches your team a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot that you can learn from failure. And as long as you apply it to your next iteration, right, you learn from that, then you can just keep on rolling. What do you think of heist movies and being strategic?
Heist movies, I'd say those are more tactical.
Okay.
There's a difference from my head between tactical and strategic. So strategic is like the larger goals. Like you plan out your goals, like what things are you going to do? What sort of decisions are you going to make? The larger strategy to accomplish some sort of goal for like a business, that would be, how can we increase our sales month over month by 10%? It's a general outline to make a thing. Whereas, and for like a heist movie, it's just like, how do we steal money without getting caught? And not only that, how do we steal that money, get off to some plane to some other country, and be able to enjoy the money? Because you can steal the money, but you can get caught on the plane out of wherever you're coming from. So that's the difference. It's not planning to the end, but understanding how each move fits in the larger picture. Now, tactics is different. Tactics is the means that you use to execute it. So for the heist, for business, it's like, okay, we're going to build what's it called? We're going to build a linear regression model using XGB boost to predict pricing. That's tactical. It's the way you solve the larger issue about like, how do we increase it over 10% over year. For heist movies, it's okay, so which door is the most easiest way to like break in, or should we go through the sewer? That's tactical. And then ops sits in between those two. So you can get the resources where you need it, because you can have the greatest strategy ever. But if you can't get the resources, you can't execute the tactics. And if you do the tactics, you don't have the resources or the communication or the coordination to follow up on successes that come from a tactical action.
So would you say when you are working on a project, you need to look at it at all 3 angles?
Yes, definitely. You have to have a good business model, a good operating model, and a good like execution model. So strategy, ops, tactics in that order. So yeah, it's definitely important, because I've seen like really, really good models go into production, but there wasn't enough coordination at the ops level to make sure that the resources were there to push it forward, or to communicate the results fast enough up to the leadership to say, okay, we need to allocate more resources or budget towards this. So the ops is the bridge. It's a strong bridge between the strategy being good, having good strategy, and having good execution, which is tactics.
Very interesting. You mentioned something earlier in your origin story that I just have to come back to. And you mentioned that you were a bartender and how technical or tactical it was. I forget which term that you used. Can you go
Tactical,
more into that?
technical, and tactical.
Okay.
Actually, I would go into
Okay.
that. So, being bartender, especially in a club, teaches you how to prioritize very well.
I
So,
bet.
technical because you need to know the exact proportion of the drinks because people will complain and have you remix them. Um, Tactical because you need to know how to like prioritize which ones come in first. So like this was a bar in I believe, where was it? Yeah, there's a bar in Hong Kong. So yeah, this is a hotel bar. So that was very, they're demanding. So they want certain requirements. So you need to know who to prioritize first. You need to be able to know how to drink. You need to know how to prep well. Oh, prep is so big. Like
Hmm.
one thing the chief bartender used to teach me was, okay, you need to figure out where everything is in your mind's eye. He did what's called mental imaging. He'd sit there at the front counter, find out where everything's at, the ice, the popular drinks, the cups, and then would be able to do it quickly enough. So that's the tactical end I was talking about. The point of doing that was he could execute quickly enough, and he could focus only on the technical end, which was the proportions of the drinks. You used to tell me if you can't mix a good Coke, you don't you can't do a basics like mix a good Coke. You're not skilled enough to mix the drinks. He used to tell me that.
Yeah, that seems pretty basic, just a Coke and a liquor, right?
Oh yeah, but he was really dedicated. So he'd go downstairs and figure out he'd taste proportions for the Coke just to make sure it was the right proportion.
Ah,
So like if you mixed a Jack and whiskey, you'd be like, okay, it's not getting the flavor is not getting overwhelmed by the sugar or by the Coke.
okay.
Yeah, he would adjust it.
All right. That makes sense. So there's just a perfect ratio.
Correct. And to use this as an analogy for data science, you're always going to have to adjust. You're always going to have to like figure out, you're going to always have to practice like the fundamentals, and you're always going to have to find ways to express those new fundamentals and relearn them. And you'll relearn them over and over. And that's something I tell my mentees. If you want to be good at your job, just look at the fundamentals, relearn them over, and figure out new ways how they're going to change in the future. Because business fundamentals, technical fundamentals, they don't really change. Like now, like I'm still using the stuff I learned from school for my computer science stuff. It's just with data this time instead of a software program.
That's a good point. Speaking of learning, how do you like to learn new things? What are your go to resources?
So, I mean, for main resources, for me, it's just, of course, O'Reilly. Everyone likes O'Reilly. YouTube. But a third one I found that's really useful, it's papers, like any like research papers. So the research papers, if you filter through them, you'll find a lot of what's coming. Like you're not, I mean, unless you're some kind of research data scientist or research data engineer or something, you probably won't be building this stuff out. But if you're just a normal person like you, me, it's good to see where the potential of the future is. The idea for me, for with any of the learning I do, isn't to become the expert. It's to be able to create frameworks in my head. So when the time comes that stuff happens, then I can say, oh, okay, I know what to study. I can boil it down to what to study. So like I learned a lot about BERT before. I'm 2 years ago, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And some NLP, and again, I don't know what I'm doing with this. This is 2 years ago. If you asked me, I don't know what I was doing at that time. Now, though, when I'm looking at the GPT and all this LLMs that I've started to work on, I'm like, oh, that's from BERT. Oh, that's a concept from NLP.
Mm.
So the idea is to create a frame for learning. It's not just like use O'Reilly, YouTube, and the papers, but it's to create a framework in your head so you're always in position to learn something new.
I love that analogy. I always think about it as being resourceful so you know where to go when you don't technically know the deep answers. But that being a framework, that is a
Mhm.
perfect analogy.
And the key is not to try and like fill the blanks in. It's like drawing a circle first and then coloring it only when you need to.
Ah,
Or even put a drawing
love
inside the
it.
color. Even putting a drawing inside the circle.
Love that. Amazing. Well, do you have any other recommendations or words of encouragement for the listeners?
Yeah, don't give up. I mean, you're going to feel you like your data science and anything you're doing right now, whether you're starting a new business or anything, it's a cycle. You're going to go through really high successes and you're going to also go through golden failures. And I use the word golden failures for a reason because everything we do is a cycle. You got to accept that it's going to be good and bad. And by golden failures, I mean it's not about whether or not you're going to fail or make a mistake. You are. We didn't get here by we weren't born from our we weren't born trying to walk. No one was. We fell on our faces. We just don't remember it. The thing is like for us in data science, it's about what did we learn? What value did we get from those lessons? And how can we use these lessons to pivot into the future for what we're learning? For example, I failed accounting 3 times when I was in school, financial accounting. And I'm like, what is the point of this? Ironically, though, that helps me with pricing because now I'm like, okay, this is why the pricing model works this way. And I'm able to communicate with the accountants better. So that was a golden failure. And that's the final lesson I'm going to leave here. Not all golden failures are obvious when you fail. You just got to keep going. And then years or when it finally hits you, you'll be like, wow, I'm glad I failed.
I love that so much. Be glad that you failed, y'all.
Yeah, and it goes back and in the end, it's how do I say this? Sometimes what looks like a failure to you was is a success to another person. It's the weirdest thing in the world, and it's important to know that.
If any of the listeners have any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
Well, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot about like my thoughts are on there, and I'm a little more conversational on Twitter. So those are 2 places you can find me right now. YouTube channel will be improved as time goes on, though.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much, Matt, for coming on the show with us and sharing your awesome stories.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate this.
Absolutely. And as always, folks, happy learning.
Bye.